I'd just like to say that naturally the war of 1914-18 was over a period of 4.5 years, and they were during my what we call formative years, I suppose, from the time I was 7 until I was 11 and a half, 12. It must have affected my life considerably in various ways. I think my father being away as he was practically all through the war had some, although I recollect that whenever my father came home on leave, which used to happen now and again, we always had very happy times. Although my father was a very strict, in these days we would say he was a real old martinet, but we've always, he sort of ruled to a certain extent with a rod of iron. I've always, all my life, had great respect for him. He was a self-made man, in as much as I say self-made, more or less self-educated. I think he had a very poor education as a youngster, just a normal elementary school, and he was also one of a family of about 7 or 8 children, which was the sort of fashion in those days. And he had a hard life and worked hard all his life, but was very keenly interested in trying to progress himself, and became a trade union secretary. And I remember always admiring his handwriting, and unfortunately never able to capture it myself. Never able to, as I say, my master, Mr. Nibbs, impressed upon me the value of good handwriting and tried to get me to practice hour upon hour, but that I couldn't do. He also tried to interest me in French as a extra educational facility. For some reason, why I don't know, but just myself, we seemed to get on quite well together, and although we had the normal education, he tried to give me extra education, but he was a man that was handicapped all his life with very bad migraine, and it used to send him at times round the bend. He used to go practically completely mad, which was a very bad thing for a schoolmaster to be afflicted with, I always thought. Anyway...
How did it show? You say you went round the bend.
Oh, he used to walk about. I'll never forget, I always see him. He used to walk about with his hand on his hip. Oh, God. Walking about absolutely in anguish, you know. And it'd be so mad, you know. It'd say, any slightest misdemeanor and you'd get 6 of them. You know, 3 on each hand or 6 on each hand if it was very bad. Don't matter what it was, you know. He was always sort of, you know, because of his agony that it was in all his life, he, or more or less all his life, he seemed to always be afflicted by this migraine badly, because I didn't know what it was then. I didn't know it was migraine then. But he would try and relieve his feelings, I suppose, at the expense of the children in those days, because corporal punishment was allowed. A few clips on the hand and that sort of thing was, but if it was very bad in those days. If you'd committed a big misdemeanour, you had to be caned by the headmaster, and the headmaster would have you out and cane you in front of the whole school, give you either, according to the nature of the misdemeanour, he'd give you 2 strokes, 4 strokes or 6 strokes, and your name would be entered in what they called the punishment book. You always had, in my school, I don't recollect, although I know that people were hit in other positions on the backside and that sort of thing, I don't recollect ever being struck in any other way but only with a cane on the hand.
Did you often have the cane?
I wouldn't say I often had it, no, but I've had it a couple of times. And everyone, they've got to be they had to be an absolute model schoolboy that didn't get, could say that all through his education he hadn't had the cane in those days.
What did you get it for?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. You'd get the cane if you were late. Or if you were late on 2 or 3 occasions during the week, you'd end up with getting cane for it. You could get the cane for a hell of a lot of things that people wouldn't dream of these days.
Would you get the cane just for getting your work wrong?
Yes. No. Not as far as getting the work wrong, but talking. If you spoke to another person whilst you were, or if you were looking over another person's shoulder, things like that would earn you either a stroke of the cane or a couple of strokes of the cane if you were cheating. Those sort of things, which were all done, I suppose, to correct and educate the person in what they considered or was the right way to do it. But I remember some of the female school teachers would rap you across the knuckles with a ruler for various misdemeanours, but most of my recollections mostly are of male teachers, and they always took you out and caned you in front of the school.
Who were your friends?
Well, I can't recollect many schoolboy friends, actually. Some of them, I know 1 or 2 of my sort of schoolboy acquaintances have got on very well in the world. In actual fact, I know now that one of them, whose father was in the print trade and therefore a bit better off financially than most other people around the area, he financed this lad not long after he'd left school, or sometime after he'd left school. He financed him in a cleaners, dyers and cleaners as we called them in those days, cleaning business, and now he has one of the biggest cleaning businesses in this country, I suppose, and that was a chap called Bob Pritchard, and now he has, I know now that his, although I don't suppose it's actually his, it was his company, but now he must have been a couple of years older than me, and he's probably handed it down to his son, or somebody, or sold out. I don't know whether it's still, he still exists in the company, but Pritchards have secured the contract for keeping the whole of Wandsworth clean, and they're quite a big firm. And they must be a millionaire sort of firm, and they started with one dyers and cleaners shop. Now, as I've said, the war played a great influence, or had a great influence on my life to a certain extent. I know that everybody was so, by the time 1918 came along, we'd had nearly 4 years of it, and everybody was getting completely fed up with it. When the hell is this war going to end? When suddenly came November, around October, I suppose it was proclaimed in around about October or November, that the war was, there was a armistice going to be signed. I believe the Germans had asked for it, and there was an armistice going to be signed, and the war would be finished as far as we were concerned. I know then that it was proclaimed that it would be on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. That was the 11 a.m. on the 11th of November, 1918. And we were to, there was to be a proclamation, or guns would be let off, or some way of notifying everybody that it had actually been signed, that was the time. And we were all let out of school at that particular moment, and everybody went completely haywire. I recollect that there was, in every street all around London that you could see, there was big bonfires burning. People collected everything, all the old rubbish they could think of, and piled it all up in the centre of each street or each road, and set fire to it at night time, at dusk. They made big bonfires just the same as you make on Guy Fawkes Day. But they were all made in the streets, and consequently in a lot of areas, I know that in my particular area, all the wooden railings, palings and that sort of thing that were around the houses were pulled off in most houses. And I can recollect this bonfire that was burning in the centre of our road was so big and blazing that you couldn't get hardly anywhere near it. But this Irish woman, it was right outside her house, the Irish woman that I spoke about, came down and put one of her, a big straw mattress on top of it. Never forget that. It was quite a pleasant, mad experience that we had. We all went through, thinking that, thank goodness, everything was all over.
Did your father come home
Yeah, no. My father came home for a short time, and then he went out to Ireland. He was stationed in Ireland where there was a bit of trouble. I don't think he actually came home until 1919, sometime in 1919. I think he carried on in the process of his being demobilised, I suppose, as they called it. He stayed on for quite a while after the war actually finished. When I said my father told me some of its experiences, I can't remember them, but he did speak about them once or twice. But I never forget that he received an injury during the war that was an injury which I don't suppose could ever happen now, but they'd been on a route march or been out marching somewhere, and he'd come home. They were all sitting round in the dining room, I suppose it was, waiting for their meal to be served. And unbeknown to him, a cook had placed what they called Dixie cans in those days, which was big semi sort of bucket arrangements that held about 2 or 3 gallons perhaps, or a couple of gallons of soup, stew. And this cook or chef had placed it just down beside my father, unbeknown to my father, and he got up to, he'd come back from this route march, and had taken his boots off and was sitting there in his socks, the old army greys, when he turned round, sitting on a stool, he turned round to get up and put his foot straight in this Dixie of scalding boiling hot stew, and scarred and burnt his leg. very badly because he put it straight into it, and had a bad leg, with an ulcerated leg and a badly scarred leg for the rest of his life. Never forget, he used to have terrible ulcers on that leg, and he had it for the rest of his life. Although he lived, you know, I mean, he died when he was 81. I think it was when he died. But so he must have carried that around with him for 50 years.
Did you see action?
Oh yes, yeah. Well, I can't. He was in what they called the Royal Army Service Corps, so I can't say. I mean, I think in those days that the war was of such proportion, really, that I think everybody that was involved in it, out in the Dardanelles and Suvla Bay and all those areas, saw plenty of action. And in France, of course, everyone that was involved there saw plenty of action. And many people killed. And
did he tell you of any of the action?
no, he never told me of any. He never told me, or never chatted much about them, actually.
Did you ask him the usual boyish question, did you kill any Germans?
No, I don't suppose I did. I can't recollect saying anything like that. And I can't recollect ever talking about it a great deal. My mother always struck me, and I will do to my for the rest of my life, as a very hard-working, hard-done by woman. She was just an ordinary educated person. Had been in her young days what they called a bookbinder. Worked at Oddham's Press or one of those presses, helping to bind books and all that sort of thing, until she met my father and married him. Thereby, so she told me on one occasion, she had 8 children and 6 miscarriages, which of course occupied a good part of her life. She seemed to be a person that was, in those days, it wouldn't exist today, because with all the benefits of modern day inventions, the woman's lot is nowhere near as difficult as it was in those days. In those days, it was real drudgery. She had to keep the place warm, making the fire, getting the fire going, and clearing it out practically every morning if I wasn't available, or those sort of things. Or as I was at school, I couldn't do. I know I used to help as much as I could, and so did my other brothers and sisters as they came on. But I don't think any of them to the extent that it didn't seem. I don't know. I was a nursemaid, head cook and bottle washer to the family for many years. I always thought I was anyway. Nursemaid, I've nursed all of them at various times. That was the one thing that I was more capable, or seemed to be more capable of, than any of the others ever were able to be. And that was, I could nestle a child down and get it to keep quiet and cuddle it up to me, and all my life I've been sort of able to do that with children. But I couldn't then, as a lad. But my mother, to my mind, always had a hard life, I would say, because my father, as a martinet, he was a martinet, and he was very, very, I wouldn't say jealous, he had no cause for jealousy, but he was a very hard man with my mother, and my mother was one of these persons that always would have the last word. So consequently, they were always bickering, and my father on several occasions hit my mother, I know. I've stood between them. And I nearly got knocked bloody sick myself on several occasions, once or twice.
Would you have said they were rowing?
Oh yeah, always rowing, constantly rowing and arguing. I know I came as a lad of then about 18 or 19, somewhere around about that. I'd come home and gone up to bed, and they were in the middle of a terrific, furious argument, and he was hollering and shouting, and you know, I thought to myself, Christ, I've got to run downstairs, and I run downstairs, and not really thinking, because as I say, I always respected my father, in as much as, and it was the last thing I would dream of ever having any trouble with him, or I always tried to prevent the arguments if possible, but I ran downstairs, and then as a lad of about 19 or 20, I must have been, and I used to sleep in my shirt, and as I ran downstairs, the shirt sleeves were dangling, and I know when I walked out into the kitchen, all unconsciously, I was rolling up my sleeves just because they were in my way, not thinking of any fight. And my father mistook the action that I was doing, and he immediately turned on me. He wanted to bash the daylights out of me. Will you come down for a fight? Forget that. Oh, no, I said, I wouldn't dream of it. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it striking my father. Because, I mean, even if I'd have had any chance against him, even at that age, I wouldn't have had any chance against him. Although I could hold my own with most people, but I wouldn't have had any chance against him. He was as strong as a lion. But it served its purpose in as much as it stopped the argument. On another occasion, I was married, and I'd been. This has not been recorded, is it?
Mm.
No, well, don't do this next one, then.
Don't tell it then.
No.
What about, were your parents affectionate though, normally?
Well, I don't think they were a great deal. No, I wouldn't say that they were greatly affectionate, but my mother was always, although she was a brave woman and would stand up and have the last word, no matter what happened, she sort of respected him to a certain extent in a lot of ways, but they sort of drifted apart.
Emotional.
Well, he always thought it was his duty. I suppose they drifted apart towards the latter years of life. They drifted apart emotionally, yeah. They more or less hated the sight of each other because of the trials and tribulations that they'd been through in their younger days had the effect of souring both of them, I should think. But they never separated from each other. My father always, although he had an affair with a woman, I know, at one time during his life, during his married life, I know that he believed it was his duty to stand by her and see the children, and that he did. But
You mean he had the affair when the children were still there?
oh yes, yeah.
And were they affectionate towards the children?
Yeah, in their way they were. In their way they tried to, I think, what they tried to do was bring their children up in what they considered was the right way. Do their duty by their children. In my belief, that is my belief as far as they were concerned.
Did you think, it may not have been fashionable then, but did you think that they loved you?
Oh yes.
Mm.
Oh,
you
yeah.
were sure that they did?
Oh yes. Yeah. Well, in later life, after I got married and had children myself and joined up, that's another episode, but I joined the army and I rose to officer rank, officer status and that sort of thing. I think my father and mother were both very proud of me. as they were all of our family, because we all, one of my other brothers became an officer in the Air Force, and one of the others, unfortunately, was captured and taken prisoner in the early part of the war, the Second World War I'm going on to now. But I think they were very proud of the fact that they'd had a family and reared them, and they were all not successful. Nobody was successful financially, but they were reasonably, had done something that they were proud of.
Your parents were rowing and didn't appear to get on all that well. How did you feel towards them? Did this affect your feelings towards them?
As far as I was concerned, no, because you see, as I say, that my mother, I disliked my father in as much as he would strike out against my mother on occasions, and I thought that was very bad of him. But I believe that, I firmly believe that it's only the man, it's only the person that one has such great feelings for can arouse those sort of passions in a man. And I believe that they both had a great deal of respect for each other, and she, to a certain extent, in as much as she would never let him get the better of her in an argument if she could possibly help it, and him having what I consider, he'd educated himself and he was a bit better advanced than what she was. He couldn't bear, his strengths of personality, he couldn't bear to be sort of triumphed over by his wife, and consequently they always led to bitter arguments. She'd always have the last word, you know. I used to say to her, for goodness sake, why don't you ease up a bit and acquiesce a bit more, and life wouldn't be quite so bad for you. But she would never dream of it. She would never dream of it, and she was just as strong-willed in a lot of ways as what he was.
But they both fulfilled all their responsibilities towards the children. Like he wouldn't go out for nights on end, and she wouldn't go down the pub and things like that.
Oh no, he went out quite a lot actually at night time.
Yes, but did he always make sure that the family was okay all the time, from what you said?
Well, you see,
drink away all his earnings.
Well, I wouldn't say that he didn't actually. I think he paid what he considered was the right thing to do. In later life, he managed to buy the house that he lived in, so consequently there was only rates to pay. And he was never very generous as far as paying for things were concerned. My mother always had a struggle throughout her life, and it was only the fact that in the sort of my brothers and myself going to work and getting, we both had reasonable numbers as children, as lads. I know at 16 I was earning man's wages, and so was my brother, who was also at work when he was 16. Or he earned quite good wages, and consequently we were able to give more into the house than what a lot of other boys would have been able to do, and it eased the pressure a little bit on my mother. She was able to manage things a bit better financially then, but it was only the fact, it was always a hard struggle up till we started going to work. And then of course I got married when I was 24, or round about 24, and she, by that time, there was others that were living in and paying to, keeping things going. But my father never, although he, as soon as the Second World War more or less started, he went into business, and he had the business until after the war was finished. And he also, in his spare time, when he could get away from the business and that, he went funeral bearing. He was a bearer at funerals and that sort of thing, and amassed, I won't say any big amounts, but earned himself enough to keep himself going. But he never was, what you might say, a comfortably off man. He was never wealthy or anything like that. Never. He never had 1,000 to his name all through his life, I'm sure of that.
In your younger years, did you feel particularly close to it? Or one in particular?
Well, I suppose more than anything, I was always close to both of them, actually, but the one in my younger years, the one I was more close to, I suppose, would be my mother. But in later years, I was very close to both of them, actually. I mean, I always went and saw my father once or twice or 2 or 3 times every week, and he belonged to the same club as he'd joined a club at the outbreak of the Second World War, he'd joined it before then. He joined it in about 1936 or something like that, and asked me to go and join it, and I joined it in 1938. And I'm still a member of the club, and I've been a member of the club ever since. Well, after the war finished, life more or less started up, tried to get started again in this country, as it was before the advent of the war. And I think
the flu epidemic.
we had various epidemics of flu and that, but I don't think it affected me or any of the family in any way. I can't recollect any of the family actually dying of flu. But life started again, and I know I was only a lad then. We used to go to, I remember one of the highlights of your life was going to Epsom to see the Derby run. I know I've seen quite a number of derbies in those days. Steve Donoghue was top jockey and the man of the moment. I believe he actually rode 6 Derby winners. I believe, I won't say for sure, but I don't know whether, I can't recollect his actual winners, but I know he rode Captain Cuttle. The first...
You're interested in the horses, huh?
I was interested in watching, all that sort of thing, yeah.
You weren't a gambling man?
Not really, no. I don't suppose I'd had any. Well, I've had the odd sixpence or shilling. I don't think I did even then. As a schoolboy, of course, I never did. But later on in life, I started having a gamble. But as I say, we got down to normal sort of things of life, and I believe there was a little bit of a boom time came then, or just after the war, I think. Anyway.
Did you move to Kenmore Road, yeah?
Oh, yes, yeah.
When did you move there?
We moved to Kenmore Road. We moved from Saddingcourt Road in 1917, just after my mother came out of a hospital, where she'd been with this bout of pleurisy. It was decided that we moved away from this flat where we were, and I don't know whether it was my father or whoever got it. We secured a house in Kenlaw Road, Tooting, which is number 67. We lived there, and the family continued living there for many years. Matter of fact, it was only sold after the house was sold after my father and mother's death. In the meantime, my father had left working after the war. He went back to Louis Dawes at the beginning of the after the First World War. He went back to Louis Dawes to work and became secretary of their union, and then sometime later he moved when we moved to Kenlaw Road, and he used to travel to Mitcham, but he found it a bit irksome going all the way over to Bennington Corner, and managed to get a transfer, or managed to get a job at another leather factory which was in Merton called Paxton's, and they were a similar sort of, they're now in those days they were called Paxton's, but in these days they're called Connolly's. But in those days they were called Paxton's, and it was an old Philip Paxton that owned the works and that sort of thing, and my father worked there for quite a number of years. I came the age of 14, and I was due to leave school myself.
Do you know what you were going to do?
I had no idea and no intentions of any particular sort of thing. In those days, some of the things that schoolboys were interested in being were either engine drivers, bus conductors or drivers. Those were the sort of things that most schoolboys, or be an engineer or a bricklayer or something like that. But I don't think many people had their minds made up for them, or had their minds made up about what particular vocation they were going to follow. I had quite a number of jobs as we went through, as I went through my early sort of youth and manhood. My first job was in a printing shop, which I suppose if I'd have carried on, but it was a small, I forget what they call them, a small printer's shop where they made cardboard boxes and printed the labels for them and all that sort of thing in those days. And I remember that the job I had clearing up and supposed to be going to learn the profession was so boring to me that I got so fed up with it after a while and went and found something else.
Remember what the wages were?
No, I couldn't tell you. No. I think somewhere around about 16 bob a week or something like that, 15 or 16 bob a week to start with. Not a great deal in those days.
How much would you have been?
Oh, I used to take it all home, and my mother used to give me back a shilling or a couple of shillings, whatever it was, 2 or 3 shillings, or she made sure, in those days you always took all your wages home to your mother, and whatever they were, and she gave you enough that she thought was necessary for you. I can't recollect all the sort of things that you did, but as far as those sort of things are concerned. But I know that it was custom then to take home all your wages, and your mother to give you back what she thought was the right amount to give you.
Did you start drinking and smoking?
No, not at 14. I don't think. I think later when I was 16 or 15 or 16, I after going through various other jobs, having doing this printing job, working in a pastry cooks for a short time, various type of numbers like that, I decided that it would be better if I could get a job at my father's factory, and went down and got a job there, which was a hard work, very hard work, but by that time I was, say, 16, approaching 16, and I was a very big lad for my age, and a strong lad. I used to do, well, practically a man's work, and piecework and all that sort of thing, and more or less had man's wages. I recollect as a lad of 16 and that sort of thing, earning about £3.15, which was a good wage in those days, a man's wage. And I of course, as a boy then, well, I won't say of course, but naturally I had more money to spend. I used to give my mother what she asked for in those days. I forget how much it was, but then the remainder I used to have to spend. And I know that I used to started drinking and going out with girls and having a good time as we know as sowing our wild oats. And I engaged in that quite to a large extent, I suppose. But, as I say, I worked at Paxton's for a while, but it was this was a fluctuating trade, and they'd be very busy for periods, and then they would put some people off, and I was put off from there on several occasions, and during that particular time I did all sorts of jobs, such as hod carrier in the building industry, which is very hard work and a job that I like to do at that particular time. Also, at one particular time, for several years, during the busy periods, I worked at Columbia Gramophone Company, making records, what they call a pressman, and made records, gramophone records, for several years during their busy periods, which was from August round to February normally. Then I would either be out of work or go back to Paxton's if they were busy, or go out on the building, whatever scope I could find. In those days, I can't recollect how much the dole was if you were unemployed, but they were very strict in all sorts of ways, in as much as when the dole first was introduced, I think you had to sign on every day, and they would give you, say, a quarter of an hour signing time, say from 2 to a quarter past or whatever it would be, and you had to get your name on that register, signed sign your card or whatever it was, during that time. If not, you'd lose your money. And it was very difficult in those particular times.
What did you do in your leisure time?
I found that I was starting getting an interest. I was then, as I say, 16, 17, started getting an interest in dancing and going to the theatre of nights and various things like that, and also interest in girls and, as I say, normal sort of things of life. But
friends or close friends?
Yeah, no, I had several friends. I used to have a group of friends at Wimbledon that I would be with a lot of the time. But I remember, whilst I was at Paxton's, I'd formed a friendship with a chap named Tony Wharton, and he took me home on one occasion to see his sister. And I think his sister was the first serious relationship that I ever had with a girl. I think she was slightly older than me, a matter of a couple of years or so, but we were very friendly for, I think, two to 3 years, maybe more than that.
What's her name?
Gloria Wharton. She's dead now. I didn't want to mention names actually in all this, but still I suppose I've got to mention some. I know that we sort of had our times together. It was at the time I know that we went, it must have been when I was 17, or round about that period, 17, 18, because at that period the Wembley exhibition started, which would be 1924, I think, was the first year of or time of the Wembley exhibition.